She didn't know she was the surrogate for the cold billionaire's last chance at fatherhood until she fell desperately in love with him. "The baby is biologically yours, Evelyn." "And mine," Nathan Westbrook's words hung in the air between them, his steel-gray eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. The penthouse suddenly felt too small, too intimate. That's impossible," Evelyn whispered, one hand instinctively moving to protect her swollen belly. "The contract was clear. I'm just the vessel. The egg was supposed to be from a donor. The clinic made a catastrophic error," Nathan said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "They used your egg instead." Evelyn felt the room spin slightly. This child, the one she had promised herself not to love, not to claim, was actually hers. "And his, what happens now?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Nathan stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne, feel the warmth radiating from his body. "That depends," he said softly, "on what you want." Evelyn, what she wanted? What she wanted was impossible. Because somewhere between the clinical arrangements and midnight cravings, between sonogram appointments and rare book deliveries, she had committed the cardinal sin of surrogacy. She had fallen hopelessly in love with the father of her child. Welcome to Mr. Arden's Heart Stories, where we explore the unexpected twists of fate that lead to love in the most unlikely circumstances. If you're new here, I invite you to join our family of storytellers and dreamers by subscribing and hitting that notification bell. And if you're returning, thank you for being part of this journey with me. Evelyn Reed stared at the pregnancy test in disbelief, the two pink lines blurring through her tears. This wasn't supposed to happen, not with a man she barely knew, certainly not after a medical procedure that was meant to be purely clinical. "Impossible," she whispered, though the evidence trembled in her hand. The morning light filtered through her small bathroom window, casting a golden glow that seemed to mock the turmoil inside her. 6 months ago, she'd agreed to be a surrogate. The money would finally allow her to open the small bookshop she'd dreamed of since college. The contract had been clear. She would carry the child of an anonymous client, deliver the baby, and walk away. Simple. Clinical. Detached, except nothing about Nathan Westbrook had been simple. She hadn't expected to meet the biological father. The agency handled everything through intermediaries. But 3 months into the pregnancy, when complications arose requiring additional consent forms, he had appeared in her doctor's waiting room like a storm front. Tall, imposing, with eyes the color of winter rain and a presence that seemed to draw all the oxygen from the room. The notorious tech innovator and reclusive billionaire had looked at her with such intensity that Evelyn had felt the baby flutter inside her for the first time. "Ms. Reed," he'd said, his voice deeper than she'd imagined. "I'm Nathan Westbrook." Now, sitting on the edge of her bathtub, Evelyn faced an impossible truth. The fertility clinic had made a catastrophic error. The embryo they implanted wasn't from an anonymous donor egg in Nathan's sperm as planned. Somehow, against all medical protocols and safeguards, they had used her egg. The baby growing inside her was biologically hers. And his. The revelation had come through routine genetic testing, results delivered in a sterile envelope that had turned her world upside down. The clinic director had called, voice tight with professional panic, offering settlements, apologies, legal options. But all Evelyn could think about was Nathan Westbrook, the man who had lost his wife 3 years ago, whose last chance at fatherhood rested in her womb, and who had no idea that the child he believed was created from a donor egg was actually half hers. The man she had, against all reason and professional boundaries, fallen desperately in love with. Evelyn's journey to becoming a surrogate hadn't been a straight path. After graduating with honors in English literature, she'd secured a position as an adjunct professor at Seattle Pacific University. The work was fulfilling but barely covered her student loans, let alone her dream of opening a bookstore where readers could find not just bestsellers, but treasures from small presses and forgotten classics. "You're living on ramen again, aren't you?" her friend Mia had asked during one of their weekly coffee dates, eyeing Evelyn's gaunt face with concern. "It's an underappreciated cuisine," Evelyn had joked, but the humor didn't reach her eyes. That same afternoon, scrolling through job listings on her laptop, an advertisement had caught her attention. Become a surrogate mother, generous compensation for helping create families. The idea had seemed foreign at first, carrying a child for someone else. But the more she researched, the more it made sense. She was healthy, had no desire for children of her own yet, and the compensation would be enough to finally open her bookstore. Are you sure about this? Mia had asked when Evelyn shared her decision. It's not just 9 months of your life. It's your body, your emotions that I'm sure, Evelyn had replied with more confidence than she felt. It's a gift I can give someone while helping myself. Besides, there won't be any emotional attachment. It's not my egg, not my child. The irony of those words now made her stomach clench. The screening process had been rigorous medical examinations, psychological evaluations, background checks. When she was finally approved, the agency had presented her with a profile, a single father seeking a surrogate, anonymous beyond his medical history, which was impeccable apart from a battle with cancer years earlier that had affected his fertility. You won't meet the biological father, the coordinator had explained. All communication will go through us. It's cleaner that way. Emotionally speaking, Evelyn had signed the contract without hesitation. The embryo transfer had been successful on the first attempt. Everything had been proceeding according to plan until the complication of a small subchorionic hematoma that required additional monitoring and, crucially, additional consent forms from the biological father. That day in the waiting room had changed everything. Nathan Westbrook's life had been defined by loss and triumph in equal measure. Born to working-class parents in a small town outside Portland, he'd shown an early aptitude for computers, building his first program at 12. A scholarship to MIT had been his ticket out, and by 25, he'd founded Westbrook Innovations, a startup focused on artificial intelligence solutions. Success had come quickly, but so had tragedy. At 32, just as his company was being valued at over $1 billion, his wife Elise had collapsed during a charity gala. An undiagnosed heart condition had taken her life in minutes, leaving Nathan a widower at the height of his success. Grief had nearly destroyed him. For months, he'd retreated from public life, leaving his company in the hands of his executive team. When he'd finally emerged, something in him had changed. The charismatic innovator had become the ice king of tech, brilliant but distant, driving his company to even greater heights while keeping everyone at arm's length. Then came his own health crisis. What started as fatigue was diagnosed as an aggressive form of lymphoma. The treatment had been brutal but successful. He'd beaten cancer, only to learn that the aggressive chemotherapy had severely impacted his fertility. If you want biological children, Mr. Westbrook, you should consider banking sperm immediately, his oncologist had advised. And even then, your window of viability may be limited. The news had awakened something in Nathan, a desire he'd buried with Elise. They had always planned to have children, someday that never came. Now, facing his own mortality, he realized he didn't want his legacy to be just lines of code and stock options. He wanted a family. He'd banked his sperm before treatment began and, after recovery, had approached elite surrogacy agency with his requirements: discretion, professionalism, and no personal involvement with the surrogate. He would provide his sperm, pay for a donor egg from a woman with the qualities he and Elise had once discussed for their future children: intelligence, creativity, health, and hire a surrogate to carry the child. It was a business transaction, nothing more. Until the complication arose, and his carefully constructed walls began to crumble, Nathan stood in his office at Westbrook Tower, staring out at the Seattle skyline as rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows. In his hand, he held the latest sonogram image, a grainy black and white photo that somehow contained all his hopes for the future. Mr. Westbrook. His assistant's voice came through the intercom. The board is waiting in the conference room. Tell them I'll be 5 minutes, he replied, his eyes never leaving the image. He should have sent his lawyer to handle the consent forms. That had been the plan: no contact with the surrogate, no emotional complications. But something had compelled him to go himself, to see the woman carrying his child. He hadn't expected Evelyn Reed, with her warm brown eyes and quiet confidence. She'd been nothing like he'd imagined. Not that he'd spent much time imagining her at all. She was supposed to be a means to an end, not a person who would occupy his thoughts, but from the moment she'd looked up from her book in the waiting room Dostoevsky, he'd noted with surprise something had shifted in his carefully ordered world. Ms. Reed? He'd said, approaching her chair. She'd stood, one hand instinctively cradling her slightly rounded belly. Mr. Westbrook. I didn't expect to meet you, nor I you, he'd admitted. But the situation requires direct consent. She'd nodded, professional and composed, but he'd caught the flicker of curiosity in her eyes. Of course. I understand that they'd signed the forms together, their conversation strictly limited to the medical issue at hand. But as they'd prepared to part ways, she'd said something that had stayed with him. "That I want you to know," she'd said softly, "that I'm taking excellent care of your child. I talk to them, play music. I know that's not in the contract, but, what music?" He'd asked, surprising himself with the question. That a small smile had touched her lips. "Classical, mostly. Some jazz. I read somewhere that babies can hear from the womb, and I thought Elise loved Chopin." He'd interrupted, the name of his late wife slipping out before he could stop it. "Nocturnes, especially." Something had softened in Evelyn's expression. "I'll add Chopin to the rotation." That small exchange had been the first crack in the wall he'd built around himself. After that day, he'd found reasons to attend more appointments, to ask questions about her comfort, her health. He'd learned she was a literature professor with dreams of opening a bookstore. That she preferred tea to coffee, mysteries to romances, autumn to summer. And somewhere along the way, the child in her womb had become real to him in a way it hadn't been before. Not just an abstract concept of legacy, but a person connected to this woman who spoke about books as if they were living things and who carried his child with such gentle care. His phone vibrated in his pocket, pulling him from his thoughts. Evelyn's name appeared on the screen, sending an unexpected surge of warmth through him. "Evelyn," he answered, his voice softening in a way his board members would never recognize. "That we need to talk," she said, her voice unsteady. "In person. It's about the baby." Fear gripped him with cold fingers. "Is everything all right?" "The baby is fine," she assured him quickly. "But there's been a complication. Can you come to my apartment tonight?" Nathan was already moving toward the door. "I'll be there in 20 minutes." As he strode through the office, he caught his assistant's surprised expression. "Cancel the board meeting," he instructed. "Family emergency." The words felt foreign on his tongue. Family. Was that what this was becoming? Evelyn paced her small living room, rehearsing explanations that all seemed inadequate. How do you tell a man that a medical error had fundamentally changed the nature of your arrangement? That the child he thought was created from a donor egg was actually biologically hers, that she had broken every professional boundary by falling in love with him? Rain pattered against her windows, matching the rhythm of her anxious heartbeat. Her apartment, usually a haven of comfort with its overflowing bookshelves and mismatched furniture, felt suddenly inadequate. What would Nathan Westbrook, who lived in a penthouse featured in architectural magazines, think of her humble space? "Stop it," she muttered to herself. "That's not what matters right now." She paused at the small side table where she'd placed the envelope from the clinic, its contents still surreal to her. Inside was irrefutable evidence that the child she carried shared her DNA. A mistake so profound it seemed impossible in an industry built on precision and protocols. A sharp knock interrupted her thoughts. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door to find Nathan standing there, rain darkening his tailored coat, concern etched across his features. "What's happened?" he asked without preamble. Evelyn gestured him inside, suddenly aware of how modest her apartment must seem to a man who owned half of Seattle's skyline. Books lined every available surface, stacked on tables and shelves, creating the cozy chaos she found comforting. "Please, sit," she said, indicating her small sofa. Nathan remained standing, tension visible in the set of his shoulders. "Just tell me what's wrong." Evelyn wrapped her arms around herself, one hand resting on her swollen belly. "The fertility clinic made a mistake," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. A significant one. She watched his expression shift from concern to confusion. "The embryo they implanted, it wasn't created with a donor egg as planned." She forced herself to meet his eyes. "They used my egg, Nathan. The baby is biologically mine. And yours." The silence that followed seemed to stretch into infinity. Nathan's face went completely still, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her heart race. "That's impossible," he finally said, his voice barely audible. "The protocols were breached," she finished. "Human error. The clinic director called this morning. They're preparing legal documents, compensation offers." She trailed off, watching him process the information. Nathan moved to the window, his back to her, shoulders rigid. So the child is, half mine, Evelyn confirmed. Genetically, legally. I'm not just the surrogate anymore. I'm the mother. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. And what do you want? The question caught her off guard. In all her imagined scenarios, she hadn't considered that he would ask about her wishes. That I don't know, she admitted. The contract we signed doesn't cover this situation. Legally, I have rights I didn't have before. But that doesn't change your rights as the father. Nathan crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping directly in front of her. That's not what I asked, Evelyn. What do you want? The truth hovered on her lips, dangerous and impossible. I want to keep this baby. I want you. I want us to be a family. Instead, she said, I want what's best for the child. Something flickered in his eyes. Disappointment. Relief? She couldn't tell. That we need time, he said finally. Both of us. To consider the implications, Evelyn nodded, fighting back tears. Of course. Nathan reached out hesitantly, his hand hovering near her belly before pulling back. May I? The request, so formal yet so intimate, broke something inside her. Yes, his palm rested gently against the curve of her stomach, warm through the thin fabric of her dress. As if on cue, the baby kicked against his hand, and Nathan's eyes widened in wonder. My child, he whispered. Then, meeting her gaze, he added, our child. The word "our" hung between them, fragile and new, filled with possibilities neither had anticipated. If you're enjoying this story so far, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who appreciates a good love story. Your support helps our storytelling community grow, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. The days following the revelation passed in a blur for Evelyn. The clinic had been profuse in their apologies, offering settlements that made her head spin. Legal teams had been assembled, documents drafted, all attempting to navigate a situation no contract had anticipated. Ms. Reed, we understand this is an unprecedented situation, the clinic director had said during a tense meeting, his forehead shiny with nervous sweat. We're prepared to offer substantial compensation for this error, along with covering all medical expenses and providing psychological support. Beside her, Nathan had sat in cold silence, his attorney occasionally whispering in his ear. He'd barely spoken directly to her since that night in her apartment, communicating primarily through his legal team. The distance hurt more than she wanted to admit. And what about custody arrangements? Nathan's attorney had asked, the question slicing through Evelyn like a blade. That's between Ms. Reed and Mr. Westbrook, the clinic director had replied, clearly relieved to deflect that particular issue. That's between Ms. Reed and Mr. Westbrook, the clinic director had replied, clearly relieved to deflect that particular issue. Our responsibility is to address the medical error and provide appropriate compensation. After the meeting, Evelyn had stood on the sidewalk outside the clinic, unsure what to do next. The settlement offer would more than fund her bookstore dreams, but money seemed trivial compared to the larger questions looming before her. My car is here, Nathan's voice had come from behind her. Let me drive you home. The ride had been silent, tension filling the luxury vehicle like a physical presence. When they'd arrived at her apartment building, Nathan had finally spoken. I'd like you to consider moving into my guest suite for the remainder of the pregnancy, he'd said, his eyes fixed straight ahead. It would be more comfortable for you, and my private physician could monitor you more closely. Evelyn had stared at him, trying to read his expression. Is that what you want, or what your lawyers advised? His eyes had finally met hers. Both, perhaps. But primarily, it's what I want. 2 days later, Evelyn found herself standing in a guest suite larger than her entire apartment, surrounded by her few possessions that seemed out of place among the sleek, modern furnishings of Nathan's penthouse. Is it suitable? Nathan asked from the doorway, watching as she ran her hand over the pristine bedding. It's beautiful, she admitted. But it doesn't feel like home. Something softened in his expression. You can change anything you'd like. Make it yours, thank you, she said quietly. For all of this, Nathan nodded, his hands in his pockets. There's a library down the hall. I thought you might enjoy it. Evelyn's eyes brightened. A library? For the first time since the revelation, a small smile touched Nathan's lips. I may have added some titles I thought you'd appreciate. That night, Evelyn had discovered the library, a room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with everything from contemporary fiction to rare first editions. In one corner, a comfortable reading chair had been placed beside a small table holding a stack of books she'd mentioned loving during their appointments. It was the first sign that perhaps Nathan Westbrook wasn't as cold as his public persona suggested. As weeks passed, they settled in to an unusual routine. Nathan worked long hours, but he made a point of being present for doctor's appointments. They shared occasional meals, their conversations gradually moving beyond the pregnancy to books, art, and their respective pasts. Why literature? Nathan had asked one evening as they sat in the library, the Seattle skyline glittering beyond the windows. Evelyn had smiled, one hand resting on her growing belly. Books were my escape as a child. My parents moved constantly for work, so I was always the new kid. Books were the friends that came with me everywhere, and the bookstore dream. I want to create a space where people can find that same comfort, she'd explained. Not just a place to buy books, but a community. Somewhere people belong. Nathan had nodded, something wistful in his expression. Belonging is rare. Did you feel that way? Before Elise, the question had slipped out before she could stop. To her surprise, he'd answered. Yes. I was always the outsider, too smart, too focused, too different. Elise was the first person who saw past that. Tell me about her, Evelyn had said softly. Nathan had been quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, she was light. In every sense of the word. Bright, warm, illuminating everything around her. His voice had grown distant with memory. She believed in me when I was nothing but ideas and ambition. She deserved to see what those ideas became. She would be proud, Evelyn had said gently. Nathan's eyes had met hers, vulnerability visible for a brief moment. I hope so. That conversation had marked a turning point. The walls Nathan had built began to show cracks, allowing Evelyn glimpses of the man behind the billionaire facade. She found herself falling deeper, even as she tried to remind herself that their arrangement was temporary, complicated by biology but still fundamentally professional. One morning, Evelyn stood in what would become the nursery, watching as decorators transformed the space according to the designs she and Nathan had agreed upon. Soft yellows and greens, a hand-painted mural of a forest scene, furniture crafted from sustainable materials. It was perfect. Do you like it? Nathan asked, appearing beside her. It's beautiful, she said, emotion tightening her throat. The baby will love growing up here. The words hung between them, acknowledging what they hadn't yet discussed. What would happen after the birth? Would she remain in the child's life? Would Nathan want that? Evelyn, Nathan began, but was interrupted by his phone. Glancing at the screen, he frowned. I need to take this. Board emergency, she nodded, used to the demands of his position. Of course. As he left, Evelyn wandered the nursery, touching the crib, the changing table, the rocking chair. This room represented a future she hadn't planned for a child that was biologically hers, a connection to Nathan that would last a lifetime regardless of their personal relationship. The guest suite has the best morning light, she said later that evening as Nathan returned from work, trying to recapture their earlier conversation. We could add some personal touches to make it feel more like home. Nathan looked at her blankly, clearly distracted by whatever business crisis had consumed his day. For the baby, she clarified. When I came to visit, Nathan repeated, the word seeming to pull him back to the present. Is that what you want? Visitation, Evelyn hesitated, uncertain how to navigate this conversation. I don't know what I want, exactly. I just know I can't walk away completely. Not anymore. Nathan moved to the sofa, gesturing for her to join him. We need to discuss this. Properly, Evelyn settled beside him, acutely aware of his proximity. I know, what are your expectations? He asked, his tone businesslike, regarding custody, involvement, living arrangements. The clinical approach stung, but Evelyn matched his tone. I haven't thought that far ahead. Legally, I have parental rights now, but I understand this isn't what you signed up for, nor you, Nathan pointed out. No, she agreed. But here we are. Nathan was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. I've been considering a co-parenting arrangement. You would have your own residence, suitable for you and the child, with a generous support package. We would share custody, with specific terms to be determined. The proposal was fair, generous even. So why did it feel like a rejection? That sounds practical, Evelyn managed, fighting to keep disappointment from her voice. That it's a starting point for discussion, Nathan said, studying her face. You don't seem pleased. It's not that, she began, then stopped, unsure how to express her feelings without revealing too much. Then what is it? He pressed. That it's just very transactional, she finally said. Which I understand. This whole situation began as a transaction. But now, Nathan prompted when she trailed off. Evelyn took a deep breath. Now it feels like more than that. At least to me, the admission hung between them, dangerous in its honesty. Nathan's expression remained unreadable, but something shifted in his eyes. What do you mean by more? He asked, his voice lower than before. Evelyn's heart raced. This was the moment to retreat, to protect herself from rejection. Instead, she found herself speaking the truth. That I've developed feelings that weren't part of our arrangement, she said quietly, unable to meet his gaze. Feelings for you. The silence that followed seemed endless. When she finally looked up, Nathan was watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. That I haven't allowed myself to want anything beyond professional success in a very long time, he said finally. Not since Elise. Evelyn nodded, preparing herself for gentle rejection. But I find myself wanting more with you, he continued, surprising her. And it terrifies me. Hope bloomed in her chest. It scares me too. Nathan reached out, hesitantly taking her hand. I don't know how to do this, Evelyn. I've spent years building walls to protect myself from loss. The idea of letting someone in again, I know, she said softly. I'm not asking for promises. Just possibility. Nathan's thumb traced circles on her palm, the simple touch sending warmth through her. Possibility, he repeated. I think I can manage that. Then, with a gentleness that belied his usual intensity, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was tentative at first, a question rather than a demand. When Evelyn responded, her hand coming up to rest against his cheek, the kiss deepened, becoming an answer, a promise. When they finally pulled apart, Evelyn's eyes were bright with unshed tears. What happens now? Nathan rested his forehead against hers. Now we figure it out. Together. If you're enjoying this journey of unexpected love, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Mr. Arden's Heart Stories. Your support means the world to me, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. The following months brought changes neither Evelyn nor Nathan could have anticipated. As her pregnancy progressed, their relationship deepened, evolving from cautious exploration to something that felt remarkably like love. Though neither had spoken the word aloud, Nathan began working from home more frequently, rearranging meetings to be present for doctor's appointments and birthing classes. His executive team, accustomed to his demanding presence, were visibly shocked by the transformation. Mr. Westbrook, should we reschedule the investor call? His assistant had asked one afternoon, finding him helping Evelyn arrange books in what had become her section of the library. Yes, he'd replied without hesitation. Family comes first. The phrase had become his mantra, surprising everyone who knew the formerly work-obsessed CEO. Everyone except Evelyn, who had glimpsed the man behind the reputation from the beginning. Their living arrangement, initially meant to be temporary, had evolved as well. Evelyn's few possessions had gradually migrated throughout the penthouse: her favorite mug in the kitchen cabinet, her well-worn throw blanket on the living room sofa, her books intermingled with his in the library. One evening, as they sat on the balcony watching the sunset over Elliott Bay, Nathan had broached the subject they'd been circling for weeks. Deep in thinking about the future, he began, his hand finding hers. After the baby comes, Evelyn tensed slightly. Despite their growing closeness, they hadn't revisited the discussion of custody arrangements. Oh, I don't want you to move out, he said simply. I want you to stay. Both of you. Relief flooded through her. Are you sure? This is a big step. Nathan turned to face her fully. I've never been more certain of anything. These past months with you have been. I can't imagine going back to life without you. Tears pricked at Evelyn's eyes. I feel the same way. There's something else, Nathan continued, reaching into his pocket. I had planned to wait until after the baby was born, but, he withdrew a small velvet box. I find I don't want to wait any longer. Evelyn's breath caught as he opened the box to reveal a stunning emerald ring surrounded by diamonds. This isn't because of the baby, Nathan said quickly. Or at least, not entirely. The baby brought us together, but what I feel for you goes beyond our shared child. He took a deep breath. I love you, Evelyn. I didn't think I was capable of loving anyone after Elise, but you've proven me wrong in the most wonderful way. Tears spilled down Evelyn's cheeks. Nathan. You don't have to answer now, he assured her. I know this is sudden, and with the baby coming, yes, she interrupted, her voice thick with emotion. My answer is yes. Nathan's expression transformed with joy, a smile breaking across his face that made him look years younger. Yes, yes, Evelyn repeated, laughing through her tears. I love you too. I have for longer than I should admit. As Nathan slipped the ring onto her finger, the baby kicked vigorously, as if offering approval. They both laughed, hands meeting over her rounded belly. I think someone's excited, Evelyn said. Nathan leaned down to press a kiss to her stomach. Hello, little one. Your parents have some news for you, parents. The word filled Evelyn with a happiness she'd never imagined possible when she'd first signed the surrogacy contract. What had begun as a business arrangement had transformed into the family she hadn't known she wanted. The baby arrived on a snow-covered January morning, announcing her presence with a cry that filled the delivery room. Evelyn, exhausted but radiant, watched as the nurses placed the tiny bundle on her chest. Hello, little one, she whispered, counting perfect fingers and toes. We've been waiting for you. Nathan stood beside them, his usual composure completely abandoned, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. She's perfect, he managed, his voice breaking. You're both perfect. The nurses bustled around them, taking measurements, performing checks, but Evelyn and Nathan remained in their own world, marveling at the tiny person they had created accidentally, miraculously. She has your eyes, Evelyn said softly, tracing a finger along the baby's delicate cheek, and your nose, Nathan replied, perching carefully on the edge of the bed to be closer to his new family. Your determination too, I think. 12 hours of labor, Evelyn laughed tiredly. Let's hope that's the only difficult thing she inherits from me. Later, in the quiet of the private hospital suite, with their daughter sleeping peacefully in the bassinet beside them, Nathan took Evelyn's hand. I had a different speech planned, he began, his voice low to avoid waking the baby, something eloquent about new beginnings and second chances. Evelyn smiled tiredly, but watching you bring our daughter into the world, I realized there are no words adequate for what I feel. He squeezed her hand gently. Thank you, Evelyn. For our daughter. For loving me despite my flaws. For giving me a family I never thought I'd have. Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes. We gave it to each other, Nathan nodded, emotion evident in his expression. What shall we name her? He asked, gently touching the dark wisps of hair on the baby's head. Evelyn considered for a moment. Hope, she said finally. Because that's what she gave us both. Hope, Nathan repeated, testing the name. Hope Westbrook. It's perfect. If in agreement, the baby yawned and settled back to sleep, secure in the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged. The months following Hope's birth were a whirlwind of adjustment, joy, and occasional exhaustion. Nathan, to everyone's surprise, proved to be a natural father, handling midnight feedings and diaper changes with the same focus he brought to corporate acquisitions. The board is starting to think you've been replaced by a doppelganger, his COO joked during a video call that Nathan took from the nursery, Hope sleeping peacefully against his chest. Maybe I have been, Nathan replied, a contentment in his voice that would have been unrecognizable a year earlier. Or maybe I've just found something more important than quarterly projections. Evelyn, meanwhile, had begun working on plans for her bookstore, using the settlement money from the fertility clinic along with Nathan's enthusiastic backing. They had found a perfect location in a historic building downtown, with large windows and original hardwood floors. What do you think of Hopeful Chapters as a name? She asked one evening as they sat in the nursery, Hope nursing contentedly in Evelyn's arms. Nathan considered it, a smile playing at his lips. I like it. It suits you both. Both, the store and our daughter, he clarified. Though I was thinking we might want to make it a family business. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Nathan Westbrook, tech billionaire, wants to run a bookstore. He laughed, the sound still new enough to delight her. Not exactly. But I was thinking we could incorporate a technology section coding books for kids, STEM resources, maybe even some workshops. A blend of both our passions. The thoughtfulness of the suggestion touched her deeply. I love that idea. And, Nathan continued, a hint of nervousness in his voice, I was thinking we might want to set a wedding date. Unless you've changed your mind, Evelyn reached for his hand. I haven't changed, no, it's not the end. I apologize for the abrupt cutoff. Let me continue with the remaining portion of the story. Evelyn reached for his hand. I haven't changed my mind. Not at all. Spring, perhaps, Nathan suggested. When Hope is a bit older. Spring would be perfect, Evelyn agreed, imagining cherry blossoms and new beginnings. Nathan leaned over to kiss her softly, then pressed another kiss to Hope's downy head. I never imagined this, he admitted quietly. When I decided on surrogacy, I thought I was choosing the simplest path to fatherhood. No emotional complications, no risk of heartbreak. Life had other plans, Evelyn said with a smile. Thank goodness for that, Nathan replied. And for fertility clinic errors. They both laughed, the sound waking Hope, who blinked up at them with curious eyes that matched her father's exactly. 6 months later, Hopeful Chapters opened its doors to the public. The bookstore was everything Evelyn had dreamed of and more, warm, inviting, with comfortable reading nooks and carefully curated selections. The children's section, designed with input from child development experts, featured a technology corner just as Nathan had suggested, where young minds could explore both traditional stories and interactive learning. On opening day, Evelyn stood behind the counter, watching as customers browsed the shelves. Hope, now 9 months old, observed the activity from her perch in Nathan's arms, occasionally reaching for the colorful displays. What do you think, little one? Nathan asked, bouncing her gently. Is Mama's store everything we hoped for? Hope babbled happily in response, her tiny hand clutching the collar of his shirt. I'll take that as a yes, he laughed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Evelyn watched them, her heart full to bursting. If someone had told her 2 years ago that agreeing to be a surrogate would lead to a daughter, a fiancé, the bookstore of her dreams, she would never have believed it. Penny for your thoughts, Nathan said, approaching the counter with Hope. I was just thinking about how life takes unexpected turns, she replied, reaching out to smooth Hope's wild dark curls. How sometimes the best things come from the biggest surprises. Nathan's expression softened. Speaking of surprises, I have something to show you. Can you close up for lunch? Curious, Evelyn handed the store over to her assistant manager and followed Nathan outside, where his driver waited with the car. Hope babbled excitedly from her car seat as they drove through the city, eventually pulling up in front of the Westbrook Innovations headquarters. What are we doing here? Evelyn asked as Nathan helped her from the car, Hope secure in his arms. You'll see, he replied mysteriously, leading her into the building and up to the executive floor. Instead of going to his office as she expected, he led her down a corridor she hadn't visited before, stopping at a nondescript door. Close your eyes, he instructed, a rare playfulness in his voice. Evelyn complied, hearing the door open and feeling Nathan guide her forward. Can I look now? Now, she opened her eyes to find herself in a sunlit room with walls lined with children's books. A rocking chair sat in one corner, a small table and chairs in another. A beautiful mural of an enchanted forest covered one wall, with characters from classic children's stories hidden among the trees. What is this? She asked, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. The Westbrook Innovations Children's Library, Nathan explained, setting Hope down to explore, for employees' children, for community outreach programs, for Hope, and he hesitated, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth, for any future siblings she might have. Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth. Nathan, it's wonderful. There's more, he said, taking her hand again. The board approved my proposal for on-site childcare and flexible working arrangements for all employees with families. No parent should have to choose between career and children. Tears pricked at Evelyn's eyes. You did all this, you inspired it, he corrected, drawing her close. You showed me that success means nothing without connection, without family. You and Hope changed everything. Evelyn rested her head against his chest, watching as their daughter discovered a stuffed rabbit on one of the low shelves. When I agreed to be a surrogate, I never imagined this would be my life. Regrets? Nathan asked, his tone light but with an undercurrent of vulnerability that only she would recognize. Evelyn tilted her face up to his. Not one. Though I do wonder sometimes what would have happened if the clinic hadn't made their mistake. Nathan's arms tightened around her. I'd like to think we would have found each other anyway. Some connections are inevitable. As Hope crawled toward them, a determined expression on her face that mirrored her father's when facing a challenge. Evelyn felt a certainty settle in her heart. This was where she belonged, not just as Hope's mother or Nathan's partner, but as part of something larger than herself. A family created through chance, choice, and love. That I think you're right, she said softly. Some things are simply meant to be. 2 years later, the spring garden of their new home bloomed with color as guests gathered for Hope's second birthday party. The little girl, a perfect blend of her parents with Nathan's intense gray eyes and Evelyn's warm smile, darted among the guests in a frilly dress, trailed by her 6-month-old brother, James, who crawled determinedly after his sister. She's going to be running Westbrook Innovations before she's 30, Nathan's COO commented, watching Hope organize her young guests with impressive authority. God, he LP her competitors, Nathan agreed proudly, his arm around Evelyn's waist. Evelyn leaned into her husband's embrace, contentment washing over her. Their journey had been unconventional, to say the least, from surrogate to co-parent to wife and mother of 2. Hopeful chapters had expanded to 3 locations across Seattle, each with its own Westbrook tech corner for young readers. Nathan had restructured his company to prioritize family-friendly policies, becoming an unexpected advocate for work-life balance in the tech industry. Mama. Dada cake. Hope called imperiously, pointing to the elaborate butterfly-shaped creation waiting on the garden table. Coming, sweetheart, Evelyn laughed, exchanging an amused glance with Nathan. As they gathered around their daughter, cameras flashing and James babbling from his high chair, Evelyn caught Nathan's eye over the candle's glow. Happy? He mouthed silently. Evelyn's heart swelled as she looked at their children, their friends, the life they had built together from the most unexpected beginning. Perfectly, she mouthed back, and as Hope blew out her candles with determined concentration, Evelyn silently thanked that long-ago medical error that had changed the course of all their lives. Some mistakes, it seemed, were actually destiny in disguise. Thank you for joining me for another heartfelt story on Mr. Arden's Heart Stories. If this tale of unexpected love and family touched your heart, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share with someone who appreciates the beautiful twists life can take. Remember that sometimes our greatest blessings come from our most unexpected circumstances. Until next time, keep your hearts open to the possibilities that await.